Hello and welcome to the final live stream session at the Guest EdTech Virtual Summit, What's Next for VR in Education. As always, please feel free to post your comments and questions in the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. These are being moderated and we'll do our best to pass these on to the panel, who will do their best to get back and answer them at the end of the session. So that's enough from me. It's now time to hand over to the moderator for the discussion, who is definitely a true pioneer of all things virtual reality and other immersive technologies in education, Steve Bambury, Director of Digital Inception Consulting, who will introduce you to the rest of the panel. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me again for another session here at Guess, the final session as we close out the event. It's a real pleasure, both of to have been involved in the opening and the close of the event this year. And when I was asked to host a panel session for this final session as part of Guess is Virtual EdTech Summit, I realized, hang on a minute, I don't have to just pull on local talent. And so I decided to reach out to my broader PLN and bring in some real pioneers from all corners of the globe, as well as someone that joined me on stage at the guest event earlier in this year on the immersive technology stage. So joining me this morning, depending on where they are in the world, I've got James McCrary, who is in the United States, Michael McDonald, who is not Italian, but is in Italy, Shannon Putman, who is also in the States, and Sabina Pecoraro, whose surname is just superb, who is here in the UAE with me. Rather than be proactive and have researched all these people and their backgrounds, I'm joking, of course, I do know all of these guys. They've all had some relationship with me in either the virtual space or the real world, but rather than me tell you all about them individually, I'm going to hand over to each of them in turn and let them tell you a little bit about themselves and how they came to where they are in the immersive technology space. So I think ladies first. So Shannon, let's start with you. Do you want to just for people that maybe don't know you, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came into the world of VR in education?
Sure. Might as well start off with a bang, right? Thank you so much for having me. I am currently in Louisville, Kentucky. Originally from Syracuse, New York, though. And I started in VR about 8 years ago. I was a special education teacher, and it was a fantastic tool to work with my students with autism and other special needs, working on getting comfortable in different locations. And I've just continued with it since then, and I'm currently working on my dissertation proposal here at the University of Louisville, and hopefully in the spring I will finish that. And my research is focused on VR and education, and I'm currently creating a VR experience that recreates the Bloody Sunday March with Representative John Lewis from the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So really working on different aspects of VR and making it applicable for everybody, especially in the times that we're in. And it's just an honor to be here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shannon. And just for our audience, obviously we have a lot of people joining from the local audience here in the UAE. Just what time is it where you are?
It is 10:18 a.m.
Oh, so I haven't dragged you out of bed then. That's okay.
No.
That's good. Okay, moving on then. Sabina.
Well, kind of. I like to sleep in, but it's okay.
Sabina, would you like to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work with VR?
Yeah, so I'm actually based in the UAE, and thank you for offering this opportunity to me. So I've been in education now for about 19 years. I have to say it's been a non-stop action-packed learning journey for me that, in all honesty, has really transpired my own educational philosophy from where, as being teachers, we are more, I would say it's more defined as being a facilitator, a coach, a trainer, counselor, sometimes a consultant and a mentor. And that role has really transpired so much over the time that, in all honesty, I think we would say that as educators, we all wear several hats. So yeah, I mean, for my part in VR, that's how I transpired into it. About 12 or 13 years ago, I was doing a unit in ITGS, which is for IB. information technology in a global society. And at that time, it wasn't actually called VR. It was called Second Life. So it was a whole unit that I had to teach my students about the ethical implications of the Second Life venture that you could go on, where you could be taught virtually. And my story kind of transpired from there, where then recently I had the opportunity to engage with Bifocus. I brought in Bifocus kits into school. I linked up with Daniel from HTC Vive, implemented a whole curriculum there, as well as engaged my primary students with Class VR, because it was more of a safety net unit for them. And so, yeah, I just learning constantly about it, and that's how my story has kind of transformed as of now, and I'm still learning.
Thank you. And indeed, shout out to Daniel Kai at HTC Vive, great guy. Moving along, I've got Michael McDonald, who is over in Italy, and yes. Michael pointed out to me just before we went live with this webinar this evening that although he and I have been involved in various events over the last 3 to 4 years together, this is actually the first time we're seeing each other in real life, which is kind of strange, but it is genuinely true. We've stood on virtual stages in various platforms together over the years, but never actually seen each other's faces. So it's really nice to see you.
Yeah, and that was a compliment. Don't worry, it was absolutely a compliment. Well, good to see you in the flesh and blood, Steve, and everybody else. Thanks for the invitation. Good to be here. But yeah, my name's Michael McDonald, in Italy, from London originally, and I own a consultancy out here which supports schools primarily in helping them understand how to use virtual reality within their English as a foreign language training. So that's people who don't speak this language natively, basically helping them to improve their language skills using VR. And the journey started in 2016. Google Cardboards, I think that's for many people maybe when they got their first foot into the door seriously. And yeah, it was just a way for me to provide my students an opportunity to transport themselves into different parts of the English-speaking world on tours that I created on the web and hosted on a website, browser-based experiences. And of course, since then, we've seen massive changes with the 3DOF devices. The Oculus Go's came up, and then the Oculus Quests and many other devices, of course, from HTC and Pico and everybody else in between. And it's an incredible journey in only these last 4 years. But as I said, I'm primarily an English teacher. I studied German at university. I live in Italy, and I very much understand the pain of learning a foreign language. And hopefully that kind of helps me in helping schools understand how they could implement this technology within the language learning curriculum. So that's a little bit about my journey.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. And guys, if you're listening, Michael is my go-to person for language learning in VR. If anyone ever comes to me asking anything about language learning in VR, he's the guy that I direct them to. He's probably led more in VR language learning classes than anyone else on the planet, and has, I might say, one of the most soothing voices I've ever heard. I could just listen to you for hours. I want to get you to come and narrate my copy of Ready Player 2.
I wish my fiance said the same thing, but no, she. I think being a teacher, you're used to talking. We are professional talkers, and I think for the most part, we need to understand what comes out of our mouths, because particularly with younger learners, as Sabina touched on earlier, we are more than just, experts in our subject, if you want to call us that, or educators. We're mentors, in some ways almost like a parent figure. So I guess it's important for us to understand how we're coming across, at least to the kids.
Thank you, Michael. And finally, rounding out the panel, I have James Mccrory, who, again, James, I will allow you to introduce yourself.
All right, so I'm a little intimidated. Those are actually really, really good stories. Mine feels kind of bland compared to all of y'all's. So I think probably my background started before the education world came into it. It's probably been a hobby of mine since the promise of VR back whenever we had the Virtual Boy, which I know people have got mixed feelings on that. But they probably converged sort of like Shannon about 8 years ago or so is when they started to converge. And I started working with students in virtual environments for the most part, not in HMD or headset mounts, but in two-dimensional screens, experiencing it that way. And so since then, I've really been fascinated with the impact on spatial learning inside of education, specifically with students of all ages. I know that we get these magic numbers in terms of service that kind of come into play, and finding things that are applicable, and how do you use spatial learning with students, especially at younger ages. So for the past, I would say 6 years, I've been working primarily with those grades in primary through the middle school ages, but also doing some things with upper level students, even with some universities. We had a little passion project that I started with a few colleagues in the States called the VR Podcast. About, I don't know, it seems like it's been forever ago. That's been about 4 years ago we started that. I have really close relations with our ed tech organizations and conferences, both nationally and at the states levels throughout. And so I get to do things like run their AR VR playgrounds for them. And me and my boy Steven Sato, a shout out to him. We founded a company not too long ago called Singularity Media Group, and we basically help people implement virtual reality, primarily in education, but also in areas of business and stuff like that. So that's it. Very bland, very vanilla.
I've just got your own business, has your own podcast. Big shout out to the VR podcast team, Stephen Sato, Alex Chaucer, and Amanda Fox. If you're looking for a go-to listen for VR and AR in education, you can't go wrong with the Virtual Reality podcast. It's a great listen, very easy to listen to, and available on Apple, iTunes, and all the usual places. I think that's right, James. You can get it on all the usual.
Yeah, all the usual platforms, whichever one you use, it's there.
Yeah. Okay, guys. So I delivered the keynote at the start of the event yesterday about immersive technology, integrating immersive technology during hybrid learning. Obviously, everything's different in different countries. Here in the UAE, everything went into full lockdown and 100% distance learning right to the end of the last academic year. And then schools were allowed to allow a certain percentage of students back on campus from September due to the sizes of the schools. And I would say the majority of cases, we're looking now at the hybrid learning model where students are being taught synchronously, both at home and remotely, and they're switching out alternate days. And this itself has impacted a lot of schools' ability to harness immersive technology like virtual reality. Even at schools that had invested in class VR, like Sabina mentioned, or they had a lab set up, they're in position now where their students are maybe not allowed to move outside of a given classroom, or they simply can't have the students using headsets because otherwise the other half of the students who are watching at home on a Zoom call or a Teams call, their lesson becomes watching the kids on a headset. So I'd be interested to know your perspectives from these different places around the world, and obviously from Sabina here in the UAE, how the pandemic has affected your own educational use of VR. And what we'll do is we'll go back the opposite way around the circle on my screen right now. So we'll start with you this time, James.
Yeah, so it's a good question because it's different everywhere, right? But certainly things like equity come up because you want to give equitable experiences to your students. But one of the things that really hit home to me is, especially with head-mounted displays, is how do you sanitize those? How do we do things in a shared space, even if we are able to come back? And I think that we start to see that when we think about one-to-one device programs that have been the boom since the late 90s and the early 2000s, that model doesn't really apply when it comes to VR necessarily, or head-mounted displays. So how do we do that safely and effectively? And so we start looking at companies like CleanBox. If you haven't checked out CleanBox, you start looking at UVC technologies. You look at things like shields and covers that go on these things that are more sanitary. But then it's even scarier to even implement it in that way. So before we can even get to the question about equity and getting to students that are at home or whatever, it's like, can we even use it at all? And I will tell you that even at a school where we just implemented a spatial learning lab, and we actually just got the new Class VR premium sets in that spatial lab, it's very, I'm not going to say scary, but you have to be apprehensive about, do we want students using these just yet? Because there's so much mixed information coming out. And so in the States, we're looking at the CDC to tell us, give us some guidance on that. So I think
it's perception with the parents as well, isn't it?
Yes.
You're almost looking at a house of cards that your entire long-term vision for VR integration could come tumbling down if the wrong person tells the WhatsApp, starts the WhatsApp whirlwind and, spreads that misinformation like this is what's caused it. You've got to be super, super careful. Thank you, James. Michael, how about you over in Italy? Obviously, Italy got hit really hard right out the gate. I'd be interested to know if you're seeing anything happening in Italian schools right now.
So I guess I could summarize it in two waves or phases. You've had the phase where everything is kind of locked down. You can't go to the schools physically. And so then what do? Well, no one can get access to the VR headsets or the hardware. So what I actually had to do was redesign the whole course. We didn't have the students going in there at all. We just basically did everything on Zoom. And what it's done, I think, is in that first phase, it shed a lot of light on actually just education in general. I think we might touch on this as we go on in the conversation, but the whole dynamic of what it is to do group work, to learn a language when you've got 20, 30 people fighting for the attention of one native speaking teacher physically. How do you kind of, where the opportunities there to do that better and how to do it better in a kind of a distance learning fashion. So what I would say is that it's actually, it's been the silver lining of this big, monstrous grey dark cloud has been that we've been focusing very much on the web VR technology, or WebXR as it's called now, with Mozilla Hubs and Frame in particular. So students can't get access to the hardware. So what are we doing? We're actually getting them deeper into creating the content themselves. And they can do that on their browser. They don't need to leave the comfort of their own home. And they can even access their end solutions on their smartphones as well and communicate in real time with people anywhere in the world. So I think it's probably long term going to be more beneficial for the way I go about my work in that sense. It's very much now student creation and how to squeeze the most out of their WebXR tools.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, Frame was something that I was recommending during my session yesterday. Definitely something worth checking out. No install, works straight from the web. Very and coming along in leaps and bounds since the original version that Gabe put together. It's really impressive what he's doing there. Sabina, obviously you're here with me in the UAE, so broadly speaking, I have kind of spoken for you a little bit in terms of like the setup, but at your actual school, are you in hybrid learning? Are you like 50-50 students? Yeah.
No. So we're very much hybrid learning, and I've got children of my own as well. So Teams, Zoom, everyone's getting zoomed out of Zoom. And it's like, what do you do with the sanitization? There's so much red tape here. It's like, do you give class VR? Do you give the VR headsets? Where do you draw the line? So recently, very recently, actually, I invested a lot. Well, I invested at least 2 months of my time in trying to get in, going through motions, going through different devices, different platforms and stuff. And I'm going to come back to Vive because I knew that my students are constantly they're on Zoom, they're presenting. It's all over, in every other subject. You've got the ones at home that are on Zoom and presenting. You've got the ones in class, same thing, collaborating, etc. But how do you make it different? How do you spice it up? How do you, let them feel something different in a different environment? So I introduced the Vive platform, the remote platform, and I got the students to make their avatars. You have your ups and downs with that as well. But in all honesty, students presenting their work from that platform has made a bit of a big difference to them presenting through Zoom, because it's something different. They're collaborating in a different format. They're presenting in a different format. It's a bit more creative. It's opened the floodgates for creativity. So far, I would say that they've really taken to that part. Whether we continue in the subject that I'm teaching them with that is remains to be seen. But I just felt with Zoom and Teams and everything that we've been through as educators and as students in the past 18 months, it's just something different for them to try and test and play around with. So yeah, that's currently what I'm doing. Class VR, I would say, is a complete no-no at the moment because of sanitization. It's a shame. Other primary subjects, elementary subjects are doing it very differently, as in they are, in my school, staying away from VR. In secondary, we're allowed to cater to the Vive platform and allow them to integrate that into their learning and present in that way. Obviously, because of the way that they can create their avatars, that's not something that the primary students at the moment are able to do, obviously. So yeah, it's just trial and error, really. You've just got to keep researching, keep talking to people and trying to find out what works for you, what works in other cultures, societies, different curriculums, etc. You know, I mean, I might tap into what Michael had just said and quiz him a bit later because I might want to know a bit more about that.
You'll probably, I know for a fact that Shannon has done a bunch of work with Vive hardware. Shannon, you've used obviously lots of different headsets and lots of different forms of VR tech at your school. But I know you did roll out a big project with Vive. Is that something that has been able to continue in any capacity through the pandemic?
Yeah, so we've actually been really fortunate, and we've been able to continue kind of working with VR. I had to make the shift when schools closed, and instead of working with the elementary students, I'm now working with pre-service teachers. And so back in April, we were actually able to, we delivered headsets to them, COVID safe guidelines at home. And so the students participated in their last writing methods class of the semester, actually through Vive Sync, back when it was still in beta testing. And the first half of the class, the professor taught it just like he would. And he was able to pick it up very quickly, and he was very excited with it. And then the second half of the class was actually really unique because we had one of the students teach her lesson that she would have taught to the third grade class that she had been placed in but couldn't because of COVID. So she was able to teach that lesson, get feedback from the other teachers, and actually have that experience that she would have otherwise not been able to get thanks to VR. And she was also able to learn the tools, and like she brought in 3D models because she taught about the 5 senses and like story details, and it was about lion cubs. So we actually had an animated lion cub, and it was fantastic. And so actually we've continued that work here with our pre-service teachers. We were able to do in the social studies methods class 2 weeks ago. We used the PBS 360 experience of My Brother's Keeper to work on the Civil War. And I'm just starting now another project with the Grace James Academy here in Louisville. And it's going to be pretty exciting. And some students are going to be able to work with some of those headsets at home on that project. And we do have a clean box. We were able to get one, and we have taken multiple steps to make sure everything has been clean and sanitized and everything. And I think working with those college students is less risky, obviously, than elementary. And then having them keep those headsets and not have like constant changing and crossing and contamination risk that way has been how we've been able to do that. And with that project with the Jefferson County Public Schools, we also invested in 2 flame trainers. If anybody knows those, the firefighting simulation. So what we've done with that, since we don't have the students yet, we've got those unpacked, and we're working with those, and we're bringing in local firefighters, local chiefs, and we're actually testing it with current active firefighters so that we can, be prepared and ready for when we do come back for our students, and we know what we need to do and how we need to teach it. So we've been fortunate that we've really still been plowing ahead, but it was all about making that shift. And I think one thing COVID did do is it showed how, at least here and where I am, how ill prepared I think we are, and how we are not teaching our students how to actually survive in a digital world. And we saw that because they didn't know how to log into their Google Classroom. They didn't know how to do the actual skills that it takes to be digital. They're like, oh, we have a cart of Chromebooks, everybody's one-to-one, but they can't log into their account. So as much as it has been a bummer, I think it's really showed where we're lacking in some of those skills. So that's been something we can focus on.
And again, Shannon, this is something I mentioned during my session yesterday, that I think that one of the side effects of the pandemic has been an overall raising of the baseline in terms of digital fluency in schools, because even those schools, as you've just said, that when they're inspected, or when they're doing tours with new parents, we're a Google school, we're a Microsoft school, we're a one-to-one, we've got all this, but there was not complete consistent usage across the entire staff body, but the forced move to distance learning meant that everybody had to up their game, because if you stuck your head in the sand, learning stopped. And so now schools are in a position where they can start to look to what's next. I'll tell you what's interesting, guys, is I was working with a school group just before just at the very tail end of the academic year. And one of their board of directors in this school group was the first person to ever say to me, what about a bring your own device scheme for VR headsets? Can't we just get all the kids to go and get a headset? And it was the first time, and it was almost tantalizing me. It was like, oh yeah, that's the future, isn't it? Like every kid's got a headset, and we are in a position where, we can use any of these amazing tools. Because as I've said in various interviews, the pandemic hit, and I was hosting the week when we went into lockdown. I was hosting one of my events inside VR, and I felt like I was literally stood inside the solution, but also simultaneously conscious of the fact that not everybody had access to this solution. Now, one of the things that this relates to obviously is hardware, and unlike iPads and tablets, there's a huge, I think the word I used yesterday was pantheon, or plethora, if you prefer, whichever fancy P word you like, of hardware options available. I mean, you can see half a dozen or so sitting up on the shelf behind me, and I've got a bunch more over there. And I know you guys have all got a whole stack of headsets yourselves. And I think for a lot of people, it's knowing where to dive, which depth to dive into the pool. And Michael referred to earlier on 3DoF. I talked about this yesterday, the difference between 3DoF and 6DoF, whether you're talking about headsets where you can just look around, but you can't move in a virtual space, or fully immersive headsets with room scale tracking where you can move and interact and pick things up. Now, to a degree, I think that a lot of people see 3DoF as being almost dead at this point. You all seem to have referred to different types of hardware. You talked about Class VR, which is 3DoF stuff, obviously Oculus Quest, HTC Vives. At this point, as we head into 2021, would you see an investment in mobile VR headsets, like these kind of things where you put a mobile phone inside? Would you see that as a redundant investment? Let's go back around the circle again. So Shannon, would you see that as a redundant investment at this point?
I think so, yes. Google Cardboard was amazing, don't get me wrong, but the analogy I kind of use is it's the flip phone, and we're on the smartphones. And so, especially with Google not supporting things and everything else anymore, I think that the standalone completely changed the game. As somebody who started with the Oculus DK2 kit, and somebody who used the Oculus Go, and now works with the HTC, the Focus Plus, and the Pro. And the idea of, the 3DoF versus 6DoF, I don't think that your average teacher, if we want them to actually utilize this technology, I don't think the 3DoF versus 6DoF is going to matter to them. I think the Oculus Go was still, now everything with Facebook and all that other stuff, fine. But Lenovo's coming out with a kit that they have, which is pretty unbelievable with their, it's 3DoF, but it has everything that currently HTC doesn't offer. So it already has built-in mobile device management. It has the whole kit, all the apps, everything that we saw on Google Expeditions is now on this headset. And with it being 3 degrees of freedom, like I said, your average teacher, your average student, I don't think it's going to matter to them. And we need to get them into the technology and get them to start adapting to it. Because I don't want it to be like the smartboard effect, where smartboard came out and it was so amazing, but it had so many tools that teachers were just like, whoa, this is too much. And it's now just a giant projection screen. So I think that's a fantastic way in. I do think the mobile is not worth it anymore. It served its purpose. It's fantastic. And I think that 3 degree of freedom still has its purpose, especially in education and especially with teachers who are very reluctant to try things. So that's been what I've been working with teachers for the last 3 years. And I can tell you right now, they want to be able to, they want to pull it up and have the kids use it. They don't want to have to go to each headset individually and download an app. They do not want to have to go individually to each headset and do the updates like I'm currently doing. And they want to be able to exactly control what those students can do, because they're like, oh, they could get on something and they're not supposed to. So if you don't offer those things, you could have the best resolution, you could have the 6 degrees of freedom, you could have the highest refresh rate. They don't care because they're not going to use it. Those are the things that are important to them. So they want
that turnkey solution, which I think is why Class VR has done so well. And a shout out to Rupert and Hugh and those guys over at Vantage. They're great guys. Sabina, you mentioned that you've used Class VR, and you've obviously also used the kind of what would be considered a higher level of headset. The Class VR, you did get to use them before the pandemic, didn't you?
Yeah, so we did before the pandemic. It was implemented, staff were using it, students were using it, but predominantly it was for primary. That's why I had purchased it for the primary use. For secondary, it was Vive. And I'm going to go back to what Shannon said. It depends on your target audience. I would say as an educator, 3D OF, 3 Degrees of Freedom is more primary. It's a safety net for your primary teachers that are trying it out, testing the waters with their students. 6 Degrees of Freedom, it's going to be something that your secondary students, your high school students going on to university, where they're able to create content. That's probably more the usage there. So it really, your question is it died? I don't think so. It just depends on your target audience. And it depends on also the knowledge of the teacher who is going to be using it and who's going to implement it. Right now with COVID, teachers have had to just completely transpire to technology and have had to really engage in, things that they didn't before. So them trying out VR, I think 3 Degrees of Freedom is obviously the first step. If they've never had VR in their schools, and there's many schools there out here that have not, so that's where they're probably going to start. That's where I started with the primary, and then I realized, no, actually I need something a bit more advanced for my secondary students. I need to take them a step further, and that's where Vibe came in.
And
I think it's to do with volume as well, isn't it? It's to do with the volume of people that are involved.
Yeah,
it's very hard to facilitate 6 staff experiences on scale. Like if you're talking 20, 30 students, and they're suddenly all stood up with a room scale interacting. Yeah, James is laughing because he's probably
human bumper cars is what that turns into.
Well, just to add real quick to what Sabina said there, we actually, and what you said, Steve, we actually do have that. We have 30 headsets at our elementary school, and we had second grade students actually presented at Students in VR conference, and Engage has opened up a whole new world for them, and they were creating their own content. So I think if you can find the right audience, using the Vive Focus Plus and that 6 staff with elementary is not out of the question at all. And I think we need to continue to push that, because if we raise those expectations for our students, they can reach them. Like I said, I had second graders teaching adults how to bring in a 3D model. So I think as long as we can continue to push teachers towards it, it's absolutely there. But there needs to be, like you said, that other option for them to start.
Yeah.
But just going back to that, it's like if teachers have embraced technology so much during this COVID period, what's to say that they can't take the next step into VR, where they were apprehensive to begin with? This is the next thing. So if you've done it so far with tech and Zoom and Teams and collaborating through that way, you're definitely capable to venture further afield.
Michael, so when it comes to language learning in VR, Michael, do you need those 6 degrees of freedom? Obviously, if we're talking about industrial training simulation where it's learning to drive a forklift, you kind of do need to be hands-on. You need to be able to grab buttons, turn wheels, and things like this. But if you're teaching somebody language skills and it's more to do with the conversation and the environment, do you need it?
That's a great question. And, I think actually it kind of feeds into a question I can see on the right panel here as well. And what we're kind of talking about in the last few minutes. I guess the point is we really need to have a comprehensive conversation with the educators, the students, maybe even the parents as well, and people who are maybe even researching whatever field you're going to be applying this technology to. I think we need to see those deeper conversations about where are the pain points, what already an existing traditional model of education is not working, how could VR, after you've experienced it or tried various platforms or hardware devices, where do you think that could address some of those problems? I think That's the angle I try and come at things from, because I go into a lot of schools and they're kind of like, yeah, we want to try VR, we want to use it, but they don't really know where the problems are. And I know as a language teacher, doing this job for 10 years, often people aren't speaking, they don't have the confidence to speak, they don't have the vocabulary to speak. And if you look at the research actually on physical immersion, so I'm talking people who physically go from one country to another to learn a foreign language like English, for example, or Spanish, the research shows that actually people learn better in physically immersed in those places with regards to speaking and listening skills, and not necessarily the writing or the reading skills. Why? Because they're actually surrounded by native speakers and they're contextually kind of learning in situations that are meaningful to real life. So that's kind of my premise for what I do for language learning. So to come back to your question, I believe that 6DOF is probably for the more advanced learners where you need to be taking it, because in many of the language exams, such as the Cambridge IELTS, the first certificate, the TOEFL exam, the TOEFL exams as well, particularly in the US, you're going to need to have a deeper level of understanding of how to express a particular concept. For example, the structure or shape of a particular food item that you ordered in a restaurant, say. And having the 6DOF allows you to get up close and personal to that pizza, to that cake, and have a look at all the kind of the vocabulary items that could come out of that. So from a kind of a linguistic perspective, to feel this connection to the closer connection to the objects in which you're interacting with could provide a better learning experience. However, for many people, just the opportunity of being able to stick yourself in the middle of Times Square in New York, look around and have an English teacher by your side describing that location, I think opens up a wealth of opportunity for them, to build their language skills. So kind of not a simple answer.
James, did you want to add anything to this one?
Yeah, just really quick. I mean, I think that if we look at business and industry as trends that are going to trickle down and affect education, we see that the modular, like cell phone usage, is probably not very cost effective, especially when schools are trying to invest in that. It's easy if you're bringing your own device. That gets very difficult to manage. But in the world of 3DOF versus 6DOF, my thoughts are that 3DOF absolutely has value right now. In fact, one of my favorite headsets that I use is the Pico G2 4K. I love using it. There it is. Yeah, it's a very comfortable, super lightweight, and when I don't need those 6 degrees of freedom, it's my go-to. Now, do I think that 3DOF is going to be valid for very long? No. Certainly as the price point comes down on 6DOF, because that's really what we're talking about is the price point. 3DOF is standalone, is more accessible, and it has more feature sets for education than 6DOF does right now. But I think that the further we get into spatial learning with head-mounted displays, we're going to see 6DOF become the standard. And even in the younger ages where you don't want them necessarily moving in the physical space, like the bumper car scenario, even sitting down, you want the 6 degrees of freedom that maybe your controllers typically provide, so you can reach out and grab things and things like that. So,
sure. Okay, guys. Well, I mean, shockingly, we're already running out of time, but we are the final section of the event, so we'll just keep going until they kick us out. Now, one of the questions that's come in from the audience kind of ties in with a question that I was planning to ask you anyway. We're not going to go around with everyone with this one, because it's to do with the Oculus Quest 2, and I know not all of you have potentially been hands-on with this device just yet, but with the launch of the Quest 2 come this quite controversial change to the Facebook data policy and protocols, which for a lot of educators that then they were then in the Facebook groups and on social media proclaiming that this is us. We cannot use Oculus in school anymore because it requires you now to have a Facebook account tied to a headset. It seems to me like a pretty ridiculous move on Facebook's part. I understand the grander scheme of things. I've seen their official, their education lead's official response, which is go and get a business account, which is obviously makes the headset 3 times more expensive. Is this it? Does anyone want to feed in here? There's a question coming in saying Oculus Quest 2 is half the price of a Vive Focus Plus. So why would I get that?
One of the things that to really consider, like when we're talking about the Vive Focus and the Quest 2 specifically, is that all the Oculus devices now are subsidized Facebook subsidizes these devices. That's why it's so inexpensive. Without that subsidy, you're going to pay like the enterprise class. You're going to be paying 3 times as much for that device because of the hardware. The hardware is phenomenal, but they subsidize it. And why do they subsidize it? Well, because they want you to promote or give data to them so they can use that for other things, either selling it off or making advancements in other areas. So the first thing is with Vive Focus Plus, if you're not thinking about the price, what you get with that is you get more control over your data. Now, I know that especially things with the GDPR and stuff like that, even in the States here, some legislation that's happening in California, it's going to kind of change how these companies do these things. Like Facebook right now, like kind of taking back the reins of Oculus and making people have those accounts. We're going to have a lot clearer and more ownership of our data than we ever had before. So, but for right now, the advantage is you have more control over your data going with the Vive Focus Plus over going with the Quest 2. Not to say that, I mean, I've got it sitting right here next to me. I'm using it all the time because I'm freely like giving up anything that Facebook wants me to give up because I love it. So, but for education, I think Vive Focus Plus is probably your safer bet for $6.
And Steve, to add to that, I think something that gets very overlooked because of the Facebook aspect is that Oculus has that 13-year-old age recommendation, and that almost shut down VR completely in my district. It was very, because if one student gets sick and something, and so with having that random, shockingly the same age you have to be to get a Facebook account, you can't use this safely if you're under 13, even though we're going to sell you apps that are designed for preschoolers.
Yeah.
It is a huge issue as well. And even though, especially because if there's a research article that's been written in the last 3 years about VR, I've read it because that's what I'm doing. There's no medical proof that it's unsafe for students under 13. But that doesn't matter. Once they put that on there, that's all administrators see, that's all parents see, and that's caused a major issue. And you don't have that with the Focus Plus and with the HTC. So that's another area that I think people often forget about too, because primary is coming up so much with VR, and even into middle school. I mean, 13, that's a tough age, and it's a random age. So I think that also needs to be taken into account.
For sure. We are seriously running out of time now. I just want to. I did have some other questions which I was going to fire at you, but I've got a couple of good questions sitting in the chat here that I just wanted to ask. Something that I have actually blogged about before, but VR tools for early learning. I know some people's thinking is that when it comes to kindergarten, early years, that headsets shouldn't be used at all, that we should just be using, gyroscopic devices like an iPad or something as a stepping stone towards headsets. I personally have used stuff like the Red Viewmaster up there with kids as young as 4, and I think my old boss, Mark Steve, put it best when he said that those experiences are measured in seconds. And you can't tell me that that's going to have a detrimental effect when you're talking about them holding a headset to their face for a matter of seconds before they disengage. And I think that having headsets, 3DOF headsets that, you're engaging with 360 media, no head straps so they don't feel trapped. For me, these are all kind of key go-tos. Does anyone else want to contribute and say anything about that? Like VR in the early years with younger kids? Is this something that anyone has done anything with in particular?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to hog the screen time, but I'll just briefly say that I've spent the last 6 years really focusing on that exact thing, and you nailed it on the head. It's about the exposure time. It's these children's brains and their development is actually it's fairly malleable, but it's not inflexible. So it's not like you're going to cause this damage by giving them a 2 to 3 minute experience that they can't overcome. I mean, I've done headsets down to kindergarten before, and so it's just you have to listen to the people that are actually doing the actual research and not listening to the fear mongering that happens, especially when it comes to terms of service stuff. Because I'm right there with you, Shannon. This idea of these arbitrary ages thrown out is crazy, and that's actually one of the big appeals for Class VR as well. Besides the management component and stuff, it's an inexpensive 3DOF headset that you can use for any age level. So
Okay, we got another question coming in here. I'm going to try something unique with this, guys. This is just off the top of my head. But Carly asked, if you could design the perfect VR headset for education, what would it look like and feel like? So what we're going to do is we're going to collaborate here live, and between the five of us, we're going to come up with the perfect VR headset. So I'm going to start with Michael, because you've been sitting quietly and pensively. I want one feature from you of the perfect VR headset. Just one feature, and then we'll go around and we'll add 4 more to it. And we have the 5 things that we look for in the perfect headset for education.
It's the classic one. I'm sorry, I'm going to take you. Asked me for it's lightweight. It must be the weight on the face. I can't spend more than 60 minutes with it on my head without a rest. I shouldn't say that at a virtual event like this, but it's what my opinion is. Lightweight
On the face. It's funny. Just yesterday on LinkedIn, Alan Smithson was talking about the single biggest issue he hits at trade shows still is people not wanting to try a headset because they've got makeup on. Or they're worried about their hair getting ruined by it. But yeah, it's kind of the nature of the beast, I suppose. Right, so lightweight we've got. Sabina, what would you add to that? It's going to be lightweight.
Less straps, I think, or just like the one thin kind of strap that allows you to adjust it easily and not kind of,
Okay, so form factor, so lightweight, smaller form factor, something that's a bit more like putting on a pair of glasses, or like I think the kind of ski goggles look that you get in Ready Player One is quite a popular dream for the headsets. Shannon, what would you add?
Kind of going along that same topic though, like I know like we kind of joke about the hair, but I actually, my students of color have had a very hard time getting headsets to fit properly because of their hair and because of the different hairstyles. And so they either need to have their hair ruined, which makes them not want to use it, or they don't get the high quality experience that other students get because it doesn't fit right. So I'd like to see something that is applicable and adjustable for all different types of students. And that goes along with my students in wheelchairs and other physical disabilities and things like that. We've had to make a lot of accommodations. So I'd like to see some sort of adapter.
And for us over here, Shannon, there's a cultural thing as well, because obviously some people wear headscarves. For example, there's a VR studio that I work with who a few years back, they had an experience and they knew that the Sheikh was going to try it. And they had to cut the head straps off of the Vive because they were told outright he will not put something over his head. So he just held it to his face. But obviously that meant that he then couldn't engage with the experience because he couldn't hold the controllers. Okay, so something that is lightweight, something that is has a smaller form factor, and something that it can accommodate and is more has more of an a high level of accessibility and inclusion. James, what would you add?
So I'm going to go with the premise that we're talking. It's going to be a standalone device. I'm not even going to say it's going to be standalone, but I'm going to go with that premise, and I'm going to say all-day battery life. Something that is legitimately that lasts all day, where I don't have to plug it back in every couple hours, or in the case of education, I got to plug it in between classes and hope that 15 minutes gets me, enough for the students to experience it.
Fantastic. And for me, I actually thought Shannon would say this, but since she didn't, I'll throw this in. What Shannon mentioned before, and again, it's something that I think Apple experiences like Apple Classroom in particular, that they raise the game in terms of the classroom experience with multiple devices. I think whatever headset it needs to come with out of the box with some sort of class management MDM style solution. So you've got that sleek experience where we're all going to use this experience. Ready? Bang. It's all on your headsets right now. Hang on a minute. I want to pause it. No, I want to jump you to this other one. I need to send you a quick message. And having that fluency in terms of control, I think is really important. Now, we have gone slightly over our time, guys, but Barney's not popped up, so I'm going to keep going until he does. Barney, if you're listening, give us 5 more minutes. You know you love us. So, guys, just quickly, what's next for you? Let's go round one more time. Let's just tell us what you see as being next. What's next for you as we head into 2021, and hopefully a return to some degree of normalcy with all these various vaccines on the horizon. If the dust does indeed settle and life returns to what it used to be, and we've already talked about this kind of raised baseline in terms of fluency, what is next for you, for us as an education community trying to drive this technology forwards? I'm happy for anyone to jump in on this.
I guess for me, whether it turns to some level of normalcy or not, that's another question. But whatever happens, for me personally, it's about two things. It's about getting students connected better to other students around the world. I think that we should use this technology as an opportunity to build those all important kind of human skills, capabilities, empathy, all of that great stuff. We should not pass up this opportunity and just get bogged down. I'm not saying we did this today or anybody's doing this. I'm just saying that it would be very easy to get in the headsets and they in the end just gather dust in the cupboards because nobody knows really how to apply them into the school's curriculum. And the second thing is the creation tools. We've spoken a lot about today, actually, Cleanbox, the HTC devices, Oculus, etc. It's very cost prohibitive for many people, possibly some of the people at this webinar. So I'd say to people, don't be disenchanted, disheartened by things. If you don't have the money in the pot, there's a lot of non-immersive VR experiences you can download on your PC just to get things going, get the ball rolling, get them communicating with other people around the world, get them creating, and also getting them thinking a little bit about where they come from and how it applies to the wider world in question.
That's a great answer. Barney, are you okay with my other guests giving their response to that question?
Of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Finish off, guys. No problem.
Thank you. Sabina?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that with everything that's happened, technology now is kind of transformed the way we are acting as educators. And for VR, the action plan does need to be where we kind of figure out some sort of process or program where we can sanitize these devices and, we can continue using them because we don't know when this chapter will end. And like Michael said, there's no point of these devices just sitting in the back of the room picking up dust. There needs to be a strategy in place. So that for me would be the first thing that I would start working on now in the new year as to how can I roll out Class VR back into the classroom in a safe environment. I also think that we need to keep going with the way we have transformed as educators with technology. We need to keep empowering our students because at the end of the day, they need to become active agents. They need to create content. They need to collaborate in, a different environment. We are in a very different environment now because, it's their future, and we can't take a step back now in education. We've got to keep moving forward. So, either educational curriculums need to adapt, in the next year or so to integrate technology across their subjects. And include VR as a way for students to collaborate, create, be creative, and expose themselves to different forms of learning. And teachers as well need to upskill themselves.
Definitely. Thank you. Shannon?
Kind of going right off of that, when I had to make the switch from working with the elementary students to the college students because of the shutdowns, I was a little annoyed at first, but now it's given me a fantastic opportunity to work with these pre-service teachers because I think that's key. If we can work with these teachers to not only learn the information via VR, but then to also learn how to use that equipment. So if we can get them before they even get out into the classroom, that's going to be the key to actually implementing it, because we can have the best policies, we can have the best curriculum, we can have the best everything. And if the teachers aren't going to use it, none of it's going to matter. So we need to, make believers out of them and inspire them to want to take it with them to their classrooms, to want to do the donors choose for some headsets instead of, tablets, things like that. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity to do that, to get them and inspire them. And they're already a different generation with technology. And so have them bring that with them and really inspire them, I think, is a key aspect that we've been able to focus on. And I think we need to continue to focus on.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely empowering the next generation. James, to round us off, finally.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of what Shannon said, that we need to we really need to look at the educators first and get them to buy in. If it's one thing that we learned during the pandemic, is that the adage of technology is just a tool. It's not really just a tool. It is actually a very powerful and necessary medium today. And VR plays a pretty big role in that. And like Michael said about it being on the shelf, we got to stop thinking of this as a additional fun little thing and think about the potential impacts that spatial learning can provide to us, and take those things off the shelf and give more opportunities. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is that these technology organizations, these educational technology organizations, are now starting to look at VR as a viable medium. And so not just the exposing teachers as far as here's what VR is and what it does, but actually getting them into VR to do the things that they normally wouldn't be able to do. Like right now, doing webinar stuff is okay, not to knock what we're doing right now, and it's fine, but how do we take that into more of a hands-on three-dimensional environment that we can experience together, where we can get feedback from each other in haptic ways and also visual ways that we just can't get in this type of medium. So things like professional development being done in VR, even if it's not about VR, but it's done in VR, I think it's going to be really key in the coming months.
Thank you, James. And indeed, thank you, James. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Sabina and Shannon, for joining me today. Barney, one of the advantages of going last is we don't have to worry about overrunning into somebody else's session. So I apologize for running over slightly, but it's kind of sorry, not sorry, because I had some fantastic insight from our panelists there. I hope you will forgive me for being 10 minutes over.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, just echo thanks, Shannon, Michael, James, Sabina, and of course Steve. Thank you for bringing us all together tonight, sharing your insight. It was a really great way to close out the event. Just to our attendees, if there are any questions that you've still got for our panel, you can connect with them directly through the event platform. Alternatively, please send an email to marketing@guesteducation.com and we'll pass those on for you. So that now concludes the first Guest EdTech Virtual Summit. I would just like to point out that all of the live sessions from the last 2 days, as well as the on-demand library, will be available to watch for the next 1 month. So if you've missed anything over the last few days, please do log back in and explore both the event agenda and on-demand library some more. Thank you all for tuning in for the last 2 days and contributing to a fantastic event. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.